you're all set.
Thanks a lot. Alright, so we're still early, so I'll give some people some time. Since we have a good amount of people in here, how many of you are basically like visual designers? Okay. How many are themers, developers, or both? I guess. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to preach to you, how to use Photoshop and how to do those types of things. It's more about how you can implement it in a website. So I'm going to show some tools and details, but I'm not going to go too deep technically, and I'm not going to go super deep on this is how you do design, but I think there'll be a good broad mix across both for everyone. So I'll go ahead and get started. Most of the intro slides are intro slides, so people can come in as they come in. So I work for a company called North Point Digital. We're actually based out of New York, so I came down for the day, like I said, on the train. We deal in multiple platforms, actually. My group, and I'll get to my slide in a minute, but we're based in Boston, New York, and Philly. My group is actually in New York, so I run our open source team out of the New York office. I'm senior vice president. It's my most recent title. Just got a promotion. I'm actually a developer, or started out as a developer, so I come from the technology side. However, I've dealt with kind of the media sites and high visibility, high design sites my whole career. So dealing with sites that had just tons and tons of graphics or even Flash, going from the phases of very simple to high design to very simple to high graphic design, now to kind of very simple again, a few rounds of that. So I'll give you some kind of pointers and tips. Here's some contact information for me, my company. Like everyone else, we are hiring, but we're hiring in New York. So if you happen to want to go north a little bit, am I talking loud enough for the very back? And I can talk a little louder, anyways. So here's the basic outline. I want to go through kind of why. So why should we kind of make our sites performant, right? There's some really good reasons. I'll go through those. I also want to go through some tools. These are tools that both you can do for current stuff you're working on now, going forward, but also really to take a look at some of the sites that you've built or designed in the past. You can evaluate them. You can see how you could have fixed them. If you're still maintaining them, you can help fix them and make them even faster. You'll understand what the reduce, reuse, recycle term for this one is when I get to it, but just kind of some different terms of using it. And then I want to go through some trends, because it's kind of alarming. We've been talking about why we should do performance sites and what are the benefits, and we'll talk about more why as well here, but I feel like we've been talking about this for years. Basically my whole career, we've always talked about get the sites faster. But the trends are showing that we're still getting slower, we're still getting faster, like we're still getting heavier, and we're actually still using Flash, so to an alarming degree. At the very end, I have time for questions, but feel free to stop me, raise your hand. I think I can see all the way back in the back. Feel free to stop me at any time, though. I have no problem stopping. So first off, why? The biggest thing I feel like, because it generates traffic, is an SEO benefit. Now, this quote is old, right? 2010, April 9th. I don't really like to read slides, but I'll read this one. This is from Google. Like us, our users place a lot of value in speed. That's why we've decided to take site speed into account in our search rankings. They've been doing this for a while. They put it out there in 2010, and it's very clear. I'm going to show some case studies in a little bit to show you that it's actually taking place. So, a lot of talk about it, and it's like, well, are they actually doing it? They actually are. So if your site is faster to load, if your users are having a better experience and they're coming through Google, you're going to actually end up with more users coming through Google, because Google is going to elevate you in comparison to your competitors. Because first off, in general, when people talk about performance, we're talking about the direct metric of kind of e-commerce type sites, right? Because we're always talking about trying to make money off the web, and e-commerce is the easiest example to measure that. Walmart has done a study recently, and they do studies all the time, obviously, but this one was published. So what they found was, if you look at this graph, we're talking about download times or rendering times really of 0 to 1 seconds, 1 to 2 seconds, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. So all these are 1 second increments. And what you see is a dramatic decline in conversion rates from 0 to 1 second to 1 to 2 seconds and all the way up to 2 to 3. And this is actually the case across the board. So for media sites, you're going to have people clicking through your site a little less. For if you're on social media, if you're building a social media platform, same type of thing. What they found was, noted here, their SEO benefits for also entry pages and reduced bounces. So not just the idea that Google is telling you that it's actually better. When people come from Google and the pages are faster, there's less bounces. So I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, throughout the years, but this is some real hard data. One of the things up here, where was it? So we're not talking about a big, a dramatic increase of like, a 10-second page site versus a 1 second page site. We're actually, if you look at this note, and it's really hard to read, but I'll read some of it out. What they found was the lower conversion population of Walmart.com, basically, the seconds to download was around 6 seconds. However, the highest population of conversions, the seconds to download was 3 seconds. So it's kind of an inverse of the same data that they're showing here. Basically, faster pages give you more conversions. And another one is actually a case study that is a client of ours. So what they've found, and this is a media site, so they're not dealing with transactions for e-commerce. What they're dealing with are page views to generate ad revenue. And one of the biggest arguments, and I'll go through kind of the steps that we did. One of the things we did was we took the ad placements, and while we kept them high up on the page, we made them render last. So the ad companies and the ad agencies were saying, well, if I put them last and they load last, fewer people are going to see them and fewer people are going to click. But I'll get to it in a minute, but that actually didn't happen. So at this client, it's actually caranddriver.com. What they did was over a couple of years, they started testing out different types of changes to increase performance. And what we initially thought was if we increase performance, we're just going to have the people that are already there start clicking around. But we also looked into it more, and we realized, well, of course, Google could send us more traffic as well. And for a media site, that's huge because they can't pay for their traffic because they need to get their traffic. The people that are there are paying them by clicking an ad. So the model doesn't really work if you're paying people to come to your site because it's too expensive to get that traffic. So they really need the free traffic. They really need the promotions out there. So this graph is kind of showing basically a monthly increment of growth. It's not page views. It's actually growth from a little bit before. And some of the spikes are actually events. So a car website, you can imagine this is the LA car show. This is called the 10 best cars. The New York or Detroit auto show is right there. You're going to see these spikes. But right here, this is when we started getting involved. They did a site relaunch, and traffic came down. So what happened there? We get some performance improvements, but what actually happened was they added so much content and so many images to the site. And this always happens with redesigns, I feel like. People start getting involved, and they need to put extra things on the site. And it's not shown here, but their revenue started to come down a little bit as well because of the stickiness of the site. So they started incremental changes of the first one right here. We did a simple one. All we did was reduce the size of the images. So we built a platform that has the delivery in front of it so that you can actually compress the images automatically. So a lot of back and forth and deciding on the exact compression ratio to do. We did it right here, and what happened was they had this big promotion here for 10 best cars, and actually the traffic didn't come back down. So here we did it, it came up, and then after that it stayed up. So they kept thinking, well, what else can we do to improve performance, right? And that's what I was talking about, where we started looking at the way things are loading on the page. And the way things were loading on the page, in general, you have to put the ad calls in place, because sometimes they do documents.write or just egregious things, or the ad companies, they want their ads to show up very quickly. so that they kind of have to render in line. But what we started doing, we were a little bit more smart with them. So the social, all the social sharing icons and things like that. So right in here, we moved the social and ads further down on the page. Social all the way down the page, but the ads a little bit. We didn't want to go all the way down just in case it was going to be a bad impression. But what happened was, as you can see, the percentage just kept on coming up because the pages went down. The page rendering time went down to, at least visually, went down. So there's a couple of things when you're looking at your site. There's the full download of the page, and that's when the spinner kind of stops. And that's important. But what's really important is to see content. So to see images, to see the text, and actually see the content actually in place in the visible area, and not who cares about what the stuff is below. So we went through another round of moving the ads even further, moving the social, and actually improving some of the connections. Because if you've ever looked at the connections for those social buttons, for the Facebook like or share buttons, you realize that they're actually really slow. It's not really in their best interest to give you performant code or response time. They want it there because they want you to click, and you're eventually going to get traffic. But they're such a large network, and they're dealing with so many requests. They just want it to stay up. So they're not that concerned with your response time with your websites. So we're actually able to cut some of their code out and do some custom coding. And that's kind of the nice little spike at the end was just removing as much of that, putting it to the very bottom, making the images again smaller, and kind of the total percent improvement was this is a 70% line, this is an 80% line. So almost 80% improvement over the course of about a year and a half. And again, this is a media site, so this is all free traffic for them essentially, and extra revenue. And the biggest thing right here, actually right here. So when I talked about we moved the ads to the bottom, everyone thought, well, if you make the ads load last, no one's going to click the ads. Ad impressions are actually up 33% year over year for February 2012. And the reason, because people are actually clicking through the site, they're not clicking to see an ad and then click an ad. They're clicking to read content. They're going to stay on the site. They're going to read content. By the time, before they're done reading the content, they're going to see the ad's going to get there. So if you've got that argument, there are definitely case studies out there to prove the opposite. So I wanted to go through some kind of quick examples. So there's a cool site out there. I use it for demos, but I've also just used it for internal kind of comparisons. It's actually called whichloadsfaster.com. So Car and Driver and Edmunds are competitors, obviously. And a couple of years ago, Edmunds was much faster than Car and Driver. But we've done so many improvements. See the play button. As you can see, and just think about this from an end user. Right? You clicked to the page. The slower it comes up, the less you feel like the site's not as good potentially, especially when it gets really slow. And I'll show you some examples where it's really slow in a minute. So this is 3.3 times faster. There wasn't a huge difference there, but before Car and Driver was about, and that's I think it's actually 3.3% faster. I think that there was a bug when I was doing this one. But the faster you are, especially when you're dealing with competitors, if you click on Google and you click on one website, they click back and they click to yours, and one is so much slower. There's a perception that the content is worse potentially as well when it's slower. So go through a couple other examples. We're in DC. I'm actually up from New Jersey. So I don't know if there's too many hockey fans, but Devils versus Capitals. So the nice thing about this, and I'll talk about this as well later, so that one went up nice and fast, right? 6.9 times faster. Doesn't mean anything really. The nice thing about this comparison actually is, so these are actually on the exact same platform. They're on the NHL.com platform. So the back end is the same. So I'm not going to talk about in this presentation, kind of how to improve that back end. There's plenty of talks out there about that, and I could go on and do that for hours as well. But I really want to talk about the front end, and that's really where the studies are. That's where a lot of the improvements can happen, because back end, you can get it to a certain point. It's pretty much somewhat cacheable, but the front end performance, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's the images, whether it's just the rendering time of some of the CSS files that are out there, can have a huge improvement on your site visitors. So one more, or actually I think I have one or two more. Of course, we're big competitors with WordPress, right? Unfortunately, when we look at the Drupal.org site versus the WordPress.org site, neither one are tremendously fast, I'll have to say. However, they are almost twice as fast. Now, there's always obviously different reasons for this. WordPress has fewer images. Can't really compare them. We're not comparing the two platforms again. But hey, maybe we can fix our site as well. And then the last one is, this would be a little bit more fair comparison because these are the corporate entities behind each of the platforms. You think that they would be a little more competitive. So if we look at those two sites, just having some fun a little bit here. Unfortunately, Automatic decides to have absolutely no images. So while it was faster, one could say that this one's much more visually appealing, I feel, of course, since I look at this one a little more than Automatic. Although I do run the open source team, so I actually do deal with a lot of WordPress as well. So those were kind of some of the whys, right? Performance is going to get you more traffic, obviously. It's going to, if you're an e-commerce site, it's going to get you more conversions. We kind of knew that, but the numbers are pretty impressive. The faster you can get it, and just small changes can have big improvements. And the other thing is, don't just make a bunch of changes and then put it out there. Do small changes and then put it out there. Maybe it's a week. Depends on how long it takes depending on how big your site is. It might take a couple of days or weeks to kind of get those measurements. But these are some of the tools that you could use on an existing site. These have been out there for a while. AOL Page Test has actually been out there probably the longest. It's a hosted. All these are actually hosted, but YSlow and Google PageSpeed can be built into your browser as well. I've been using AOL Page Test for probably close to 10 years. When it first came out, I used to work at Time Inc. and AOL when they were together. So we used that quite a bit for testing things when AOL was moving things to the web. But all of these do very similar things, where you put in a URL, you hit enter, or if you're on your browser, you can click a little button that says you need to bring it up, and they'll either give you a grade or they'll give you some things to improve. What they're going to look at, they're going to look at a lot of things. Some of them are going to be very complicated and things that you're not going to be able to improve. Maybe your hosting infrastructure is something that you can't afford to get a better hosting infrastructure. Things called the CDN. I'll talk about that a little later. But there are going to be a lot of things in here you can fix if you're running it, especially if you're running a Drupal site. So take a look at them and see what they're recommending. Some things are going to be to compress your JavaScript files, your CSS files. You can do that in Drupal, obviously. You can do it actually out of the box in Drupal with a couple of clicks. They might be to reduce the image sizes or to compress the image sizes. And the nice thing about, I think, all three of these tools is that if it tells you you should do that, it actually gives you a link to download a preferred image that's already compressed. So there's no work to do it. You just look at it, and if it's actually something you like, is because the compression, it's really depends on. It could compress it too much, or it could, depending on your photo, could make it look really bad. But if it looks great, throw it into your site, and then you're improving the site. You could improve it by as much as 10% just by improving the images. So again, these are three tools that I like to use ongoing, but also when I look to evaluate some of the other sites that we built in the past.
Can I ask you
Yes. Go ahead.
What's your recommended image size?
Image sizes. Well, I don't really know, to be honest. For a recommended, like a photo, is that what you're asking, or just general, like a
site with images? You were saying that in the beginning that you just reduce the size of images. And
Oh, well, compression. So a lot of times I've seen around 60% or so is a good number to start. You might have to go a little higher, because Drupal has some configuration that you can actually do that, so all the images that it renders can do that. So you can start around 60, maybe you have to go up to 70 for something. If you're really if you have a lot of photo essays or photo galleries, you might have to go up a little higher. The nice thing about that is that whatever you set that at, that's kind of your baseline. So that'll save you from people uploading files that are not compressed. So if you put it at a decent number but not too low, you're going to be safe. But if people actually can take the time and compress them even further, it's not gonna make them bigger for you. So if you've got some really good photo editors or people that are maintaining the photos and they can get them at a nice size and they upload them, you're going to take that. But if you've got some interns or something, some trainees, and they upload it, at least they're not going to go to 100% if they threw them up as 100%. So it's a nice setting there. Good question. So reduce, reuse, recycle, right? I stole this image, but I stole it from Zazzle, so you can go there if you want to print out a T-shirt or something. I stole it because it looked like our droplet, our Drupal droplet, but I was looking for a reduce, reuse, recycle. We're not going to talk about saving the planet necessarily. We are trying to talk about saving the internet, I guess. So some of these will be a little bit of stretch, but reduce. So reduce has a lot of different ways of reducing, but reducing the size or number of CSS files, the number of JavaScript files. These are, again, both out of the box. You go and you can compress and aggregate your JavaScript and CSS files separately in the admin. I'll talk about a little bit later on how to do it a little better than just doing it the out-of-the-box approach, because there's some downsides to that. Talked a little bit before about lossless compression. So compressing your images, but using maybe a lossless compression. That's a technique that a lot of people do. I don't know if actually there's an image. I I put it in the slides a little later. So there's a module that can help with that as well. So that you're just putting a baseline so that everyone that uploads images, maybe you have maybe you're using a site that has a lot of end user photo uploads, maybe their community or something like that. So those types of things, similar to interns or junior people, who knows what types of photos they'll upload. So that'll help there. Another nice technique is lazy loading images. So I'll talk a little bit about this because this isn't a term that everyone necessarily knows. So again, I talked about the idea of most web pages you have this kind of an invisible barrier of they load the page and there's tons and tons of content below, right? So what the site wants to do is load it all, like loads all the images so that when you scroll up and down, they're there. But there's actually a jQuery jQuery plugin that actually will allow you to target all those images and not load them. So it'll only load what's in the viewable area. So if you have like a big long scrolling, maybe a view that has a bunch of images that that's on a grid. So as the user scrolls down, they can get some spinners, and that's perfectly fine for most users because they're going to load fairly fast once they come down to the page. But the big thing is when they go to the top of the page and they see your headline, maybe a couple of them, like maybe a row of 3. There's 20 of them below that. Those would have slowed other things from loading, maybe the ads, for instance. So that's kind of a nice technique to add in there. It's not that new. There's quite a few. I know the one I said was the jQuery library, but there's other ones as well that are out there. And it's not that hard. And there's actual modules that does all the work for you if you don't want to do the theming. So another question, or another one was optimize your content, right? So maybe you don't need the 20 photos on that page. Maybe it's more important to do some pagination. Maybe you should only do one, nice big one, and then paginate. Maybe you don't need the 15 different promotion things on the right side with big images. So consider that as well. People are going to go, monitor your traffic, monitor the things that people are clicking on, and really target for that. And the biggest thing that you can do is fixing 404 errors. You'd be surprised at how many sites out there. I'm sure I have sites out there as well. After people maintain them for a little while, have references to files that no longer exist. This is a performance issue. Especially if they're serving 404s off of your site, because what's happening if you have a request to the home page and a request to 20 images and 5 of them are 404 pages. Well, the way Drupal handles that isn't always the most performant way. So you have these 5 extra requests going to Drupal for serving absolutely nothing, and they're actually doing a lot of things in the background. So it could make the homepage slow. It's going to definitely make the homepage slow for the next guy that's trying to hit the site as well, because they've got 5 and it just kind of goes down the chain. And it's an easy fix. There's a lot of tools out there. I didn't list them out here, but if you do a search for just to find 404 error tools on the web, they can crawl your site if you have a big site, and they'll find all the 404s, or they'll have a single page. You can also, if you're more of a developer, you just pull it up on the site and you can look at the network traffic and you can see all the red ones. But surprisingly, there's quite a bit, and one of the trends I'll show is the number of 404 requests out there on the web is pretty high. So reduce still. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but this has come up over the past few years that you can actually, you can create custom fonts. Now, when I first started, we were doing, I worked for a lot of media companies, like I said, a lot of print publications. So they had very custom fonts. The only way to do that back then was to make a lot of images with text. So you had almost a headline that was in a very specific font. It had to be that because the print magazine required it. Nowadays there are many more options, and custom fonts is the print preferred option, basically. So you can get a number of different customized fonts. Are most people familiar with custom fonts? Some are, some aren't. So it's literally you're downloading a file with a bunch of letters in it, if you think of it that way. And it's done in CSS. So you target that file, and then from that point on, it's just like you're saying that it should be Helvetica, but you say it's this other custom font in your CSS file, and now your custom fonts, or your fonts, look like that custom font. It takes a little bit longer to load, so I'll talk about some of the benefits of not kind of bringing everything in. But it's a huge benefit over images, or in my case, I actually had to do Flash a number of times, quite a few years back, because we needed dynamic things where the editors could go into Drupal or other CMSs. Actually, before Drupal. This was many years ago. They would have to be able to type it in, and it would render in Flash and render that custom font. So much more performant than those, obviously. But if you start to think about larger screens, this is great. Smaller screens, maybe the font's not that important. Maybe sometimes it is. So maybe with your media queries, and if there are other presentations on media queries, you don't bring in the custom font because you know the person's on a phone. They're likely to not be on a Wi-Fi connection. So don't show it for them if it's not that different. There are certain sites that really still require that style. Another thing is limiting what's called styles. So when we're dealing with normal fonts, not a big deal because you do bold, you do italic, and it just renders it. But these are vector files. So if you had an F and then you had an F that's bold and then an F that's italic, let's say, those are actually 3 different Fs in the files. And if you used, so Google has a font factory essentially that you can download, and you can actually configure it. So you can add all the styles in. And what will happen, they give you this nice little tool, but as you start adding different styles, this meter starts to go up. So from green, where it's kind of a lightweight file to download, it can go all the way to red. So I'm sure the other ones are going to start adding it later. But the idea here is if you can limit it to certain, maybe you just have certain text on the page that you want to do this for. So you can do this and have a very small style for your fonts. If that's the case, you really can't do that to your body content, unfortunately, or any other types of dynamic content. But if you need it for your body text or for dynamic headlines, you're probably going to have to add in the bold or the italics. But maybe there's some of the other ones that you can eliminate. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is this is something that's really new, at least new to me. A lot of people probably know about sprites. It's the idea, and I'll have a nice slide about that as well. But you can actually use this as a replacement for sprites. Because the nice thing about the custom fonts is that they're vectors. So they can expand and contract to basically however big you'd want. So if you're dealing with, now everyone's talking about responsive, right? So if you had, in current day, if you wanted to use a sprite and you had, let me go to that one just so you can kind of visually see what I'm talking about, right? So this is a sprite. It's got all the social icons, and it has a smaller version of social icons. So we're not using this right now on this one. But if you use a custom font, you would only have one version of this, and you just make it as big or as small as you need to, depending on your responsive page. And then you're not dealing with, you don't even have to deal with breakpoints necessarily, so you wouldn't have to have 2 versions of it. You could actually scale it as big as you need to, so a TV, a presentation, or as small as a phone. So that's actually something that I've seen a couple presentations on, but I haven't seen a lot of detail yet. But the nice thing is, if you think about it, it's kind of like the the Wingdings font, basically, because you have to create these fonts, and literally you can create its images. Someone told me you can do color. I haven't seen that yet, because really fonts are, you can change the color of the font. You wouldn't be able to do like a multicolor that I know of today. But the nice thing is, it's literally, you type in the letter F and it would show you the Facebook icon. You type in a T, let's say. Yeah.
How does this affect accessibility? Will the screen reader read out the letter?
Yeah, that's a good point. The screen, in this case, the screen reader would lead out, because it's just the letter. You would have to, but you could do an image, a link. Yes.
I worked on some accessibility projects, and what you're doing with it is, so a lot of times they encapsulate it in like a span, like a span class or an I tag, the icon, and you have the text next to that. And using Drupal's element visible class, the screen readers will read the text, but then you just hide that for everybody else. So depending on how you do it.
Right, and you're likely going to have an anchor tag wrapped around it too, so you'll have a title in the anchor tag, so you can make it much more accessible.
But in Bootstrap framework, instead of image, they use a class to display all this.
For all of these,
images.
Yeah. So these are actually. So while this was a custom image, we're actually using Share This to do it, and Share This allows you to override its images, because it's just markup in the end. So we were able to replace, I think it was Share This or Add This. I can't remember what the green little thing is, one of the two. But yeah, they're classes, and really, so sprites, let's get into sprites a little bit for those that don't know about sprites. I've got this big image. Really what I'm doing is kind of drawing a little window here, and then positioning that image. So if I have it, if I have 20, in this case about 15 or 20 images, back before we started using sprites, you'd cut up all those 20 little images and put them all over the place. Now you request one image as a background and then position it. Some of the benefits obviously is it's one request, so every other request after that is a cached request, so it doesn't have to make multiple requests, so you've got better load time. One of the biggest benefits, I feel like, because maintenance is a huge issue on sites that have a lot of images. So rather than maintaining or always cutting up and slicing a bunch of little images, the nice thing about this file is it's potentially a one Photoshop file or one whatever tool you're using, and then you're just saving it and you're optimizing one file. So if you need to add more, you add them to the bottom. Obviously, there's extra CSS encoding as you add more, but the maintenance of this, if Facebook in 10 years, or not even 10 years, if Facebook decides to change their F to something a little bit different font for some reason, they rebrand, you just replace those two little parts of that one file. Instead of doing that and then cutting up a bunch of images, or if you change your logo, in this case. One other thing is, we have an open source. It's kind of an automated way of building sprites. I didn't build it. A few people on the team did it on their spare time just to try it out. There are other ones out there as well. Most of the time we find, and I found, that you have to do it custom. So you're doing it in Photoshop and then you're doing this all in custom. But this is one example of something out there, and there are plenty of others if you have something that could fit into one of those. So let's talk about recycle, right? This is a little bit more of a stretch, but I like to think of recycle as kind of you're putting it back and you're kind of giving it another use, right? And one way I think of that is kind of contributing. So we're all at a Drupal camp. There are contributions here by people just talking about things that they're working on. A lot of people are probably maintaining modules out there. A lot of people are using modules. So there's a lot of ways of contributing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But these are some of the modules that I would consider using for a lot of the optimizations that we've talked about. So I know I talked about this was designing and theming, but all these modules are actually going to affect the theme. So there's and this is, you can access these all by drupal.org/project, and I've just named them what the URL is. So advanced aggregation, ADV-AGG. When I talked about before about being able to aggregate your CSS files or your JavaScript files, that's great. However, what Drupal does is if you go to, let's say you go to the home page, it's going to aggregate the JavaScript and CSS files that it knows it needs for that page. That's great, and if you go to another page, it probably uses that same file. So now you've got a cached version so the user doesn't have to hit it again. Well, let's say you have the ability for them to add a node, and they click on that now. What happens is on that page there are very specific extra JavaScript files or extra CSS files that the Drupal knows it needs for that page. So it's trying to be smart and not aggregate all the CSS files or all the JavaScript files into one initially. So it tries to figure out which ones it should need just for that page. And it does a really good job at that because it knows what it needs. However, what that'll now do is create another big JavaScript, or a fairly big JavaScript file, and another fairly big CSS file. So now when they hit that one, they now have to download those files again for mostly duplicated content, or mostly duplicated code. But the advanced aggregation module gives you a little bit more intelligent way of telling Drupal that these are the files that I need on other pages. So now it's going to have, maybe you started out with 15 or 20 of those files, and you can get it down to 2 or 1 maybe. That would be ideal. The next one has 2 advantages. One is kind of similar to that, but the jQuery update module. You can't really do a lot of complex theming without newer versions of jQuery, as we all know. So the jQuery update module, gets you that. But the nice thing that it also gives you is it gives you the ability to serve that jQuery file off of Google or another jQuery CDN, which is great. It pulls it off of your server. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is it actually pulls it out of that aggregated JavaScript file. So if you're not able to figure out which ones are being duplicated every time, what's happening is that jQuery file or that jQuery code is in every aggregated JS file. But if you use the jQuery update, it pulls that out, and it's no longer having to aggregate that into the other files. So that's that much less code. So one, it pulls it off your server and doesn't serve it there. And the other thing is it doesn't have to aggregate it every time it has to build up that JS file. And also, the biggest benefit really is just you can use a more recent version of jQuery. So font your face, that's the one where we're using custom fonts. So there's so many different ways of using custom fonts out there. And they're all kind of complex because you have to, unless you're downloading the font and then you're doing it all by hand, that's one easy way. But a lot of them require you to log in and provide credentials and do it in a very specific way. What the Font Your Face module does is gives you an interface for connecting to a number of different ones. So you put in your credentials, and then it basically pulls in the files that it needs, and it can actually update them. Because what happens is these fonts, if they're good fonts, if they're good quality fonts that you've paid for, they actually get updates. They get optimized, they get cleaner, they get more crisp. So it'll go out and get the updates for you, whether you require it right away or just on a routine basis. And it does all that for you. So it's a nice module to have if you're doing custom fonts, or at least to look into. The other one is the kind of ability to optimize images a little bit more than what's out of the box. So it's image API _optimize. So those are all kind of the easy out of the box ones. The next few are slight degree of more complexity. Boost is actually pretty easy to configure. The one downside I like to tell everyone for Boost is if you have a site with a lot of pages. Let's say you have a lot of taxonomy terms that all have their own pages. What Boost will do, obviously, is it'll generate a file for all those. And if your site is really big and Google crawls it, this could bring down your site if there's just so many files that your server can't keep up with deleting and regenerating them. However, it has a nice configuration, and you can say it only cache this directory or these pages, or do not cache these other pages. So definitely do that part of the configuration. Don't just enable it and put it on the site if you have a larger scale site. But it is a good module, and I wouldn't, I'm not saying that it can bring down your site for any reason other than just make sure you read the instructions and configure it properly, as with any module, really. The next layer of complexity is really the ability to use a CDN. So all those tools that I talked about, all three of them are going to tell you, oh, you should be using a CDN for your images. You should be using a CDN. Well, CDNs cost money, for one. They also, in Drupal, it's not something you can quickly and easily do, just check a box and now you're using a CDN. The CDN module gives you kind of that configuration and adaptability by basically pointing it to a different CDN. But you still have to pay for it. All CDNs have different costs. Some of the clients we use Akamai, which is super expensive, and a lot of them use S3 or other variants on Amazon. Lots of different ways to do it. CDN module has support for almost probably all the higher level ones, and by higher level I just mean more out there, so low cost but really available. And the last one I put in there is Varnish, not because it's more complicated necessarily than a CDN. And the nice thing about Varnish, if you're using a lot of the Drupal hosting platforms out there today that are actually concentrating on Drupal, most of them actually have Varnish or some layer like that. But if they don't, if you're dealing with a hosting platform that you're building yourself, to configure and maintain Varnish is just yet another layer of complexity. So that's why CDN would be a little bit easier. However, if you have a host that has it out of the box, the Varnish module will connect to that. And what the Varnish module does essentially is it just tells it when to clear the cache. So Varnish kind of puts if you think about it, if you're into woodworking or something, it's what Varnish is. It puts a layer of protection on top of your site. So it's a layer of cache, and the Varnish module just tells it, well, this page has been saved. Now go clear those pages. There are a number of other ones, but I didn't want to bore everyone. I think these are the ones that give you kind of the biggest bang for the buck. I don't know if anyone happens to know of another one that they'd like to say. Yes?
Magic module.
Magic module?
They'll put the JavaScript in the footer.
Right.
Because why slow? We always get an F.
Yes. So what he's saying is it's called it's magic, right?
Magic module.
Yeah. So another ding you're going to see is with Drupal and most CMSs they put all the JavaScript up on the front, up on the top, because they don't really know when they might be necessary. That again makes it so that it's making that request before it makes any other request. So if you put it at the footer, and it also so things already start to render before it hits those JavaScript files. So that's a good one.
You get an A, and why slow?
And just by doing it, you get an A. The letter grades on those are kind of, if you're getting a B, you might have a perfectly fine site. If you're getting an A, you might have an okay site. So it's a scale to try to get higher, but yeah. Any others that people are using? Yeah.
Using Compass with Sass is a great way for making the sprites. You can just drop the image in there and it'll generate the whole file for you automatically and updates and then.
Yeah, so Compass and Sass is really a way to do development. There's a couple of themes out there that bring it for you out of the box. They're actually really nice because not just for sprites, but it's actually really easy to maintain your code going forward. So if you're doing CSS development, look into Compass and Sass. It's going to change. It'll change the way you do development going forward for sure. CSS development. That's actually more like development. Any other ones? I have other slides, but all right. So I wanted to talk about the trends that we wanted to. So we all have been talking about performance. I'm sure you guys have been hearing about it for years as well. Hopefully you can see it. We got about 9 minutes, so plenty of time for questions as well. So httparchive.org, what they're doing is kind of taking kind of not a snapshot, I guess, but a survey almost of the web and how things are being done. And these are trends based off a lot of different topics. These are the number of URLs, so recently they kind of went up a bit. That's not that valuable, but I want to show you. So total transfer size and total requests, right? If we went further back, we'd probably see this nice little wave. It kind of goes up and down, but it always kind of goes up, unfortunately. All this talk about people with mobile devices and how in about a year now, there's going to be more people accessing the web from mobile devices than from their desktop. They're not going to have as good a connection. And if you look globally, a lot of people don't have as good a connection as we do in the U.S., or some people have even better connection. That's a different topic. We should be optimizing things. What we're seeing here is a trend that's actually showing the opposite. So total transfer size and total requests is kind of on the uptick. This little kind of jump is just all that was they changed the way that they were doing the measurements. So that's kind of irrelevant. But you can see the uptick, and I'll show you plenty of other ones. So HTML transfer size, HTML requests, same idea. This isn't a big jump. We're talking 48K to 55 and 50s. But it is still, percentage-wise, that's pretty good size one. So this one, I kind of like this one actually. So while it's gone up a little bit, it's kind of stayed flat, and I feel like the reason for that is while we're probably using a little more JavaScript, we're also more people take advantage of the people that are not using a Drupal take advantage of jQuery, right? So they're not having to write all this custom JavaScript, and they're taking advantage of the CDNs that serve up the jQuery files that we were talking about before. So this kind of stayed pretty flat. And also, I think in the future, we could potentially even see less of it because there's going to be less need for JavaScript with HTML5 and CSS3 and further advancements on just basic development, as long as we can get away from ICE 7, 8, which I still have to support 6. So unfortunately, I'm not going away from it anytime soon. Yeah. I mean, this is a nice little, basically flat line. So we're not making them any more complicated. I'm kind of surprised there. So when we talk about media queries, you're actually adding more CSS essentially to these files. So I'm surprised that, and maybe we are seeing a little bit of an increase, but with such a big push for media queries, I'd like to just say that if you're really wanting to deal with performant sites, responsive designs is the buzzword, but start thinking about it because it's also going to require a little bit slower site because they're having to download all the HTML and all the CSS and likely all the JavaScript. There are tools and ways of doing it so that they download less. When I was talking about the fonts, that's one way, but there's other ways of CSS as well. But consider that if you're doing a truly responsive design site, that you're actually adding extra CSS. It's not a ton, but you are adding it for an audience that's growing. So if we're talking about mobile first, we're actually not really doing that because then we have all this desktop CSS in there as well. This is the big one though. Image sizes. We're drastically increasing the number of images. Maybe this will start to taper off and even come down because with responsive images, we have the ability to not serve the big images on smaller devices. So if people get smarter with that, we're not going to be delivering the big images to the majority of the audience will be on a phone potentially, or maybe even an iPad, but that's kind of a gray line there. Here's the big one, the one that I can't believe. Again, ignore that big jump. However, it's not going down fast enough, and it's still kind of on the increase of that Flash transfer size. I don't know why we're still using it. I think it's probably ads mainly, I hope. I hope no one out here is still building Flash landing pages. Sorry.
But exported in animated GIFs. So.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to be around for a little while, but I can't imagine they're going to stick around too much longer. And this is a good one, actually. So font transfer sizes. This is what we're talking about, where you have to download the font. Again, it can be a little bit more heavy because we are adding extra files. However, if we're doing it smart and we're actually doing it in a way that reduces the images or reduces what we were using for Flash potentially, which has gone away a long time ago, or maybe using it for sprites instead. So this number is likely to go up because now people are going to heavily style their sites, and then I'm going to be talking about, well, you shouldn't be using custom fonts in 2 years from now because they're going to be too heavy. But for now, there are ways of using it for adding performance or improving performance, and they make sites look, for a designer's perspective, they can actually make it look like the way that they want it to look. Topography and things like that are very important to the style. And then this is just an overall, other transfer sizes. It's just on the rise. And page speed scores, not really improving there. These are 70s are not A's. So hopefully people start to really think about that. But again, it's more about if you really think of it from a user's perspective, you saw the which page is faster. If you hit a Google a link and you go to a site and it's slow and you go back and you go to the next one and it's faster, I think we all know that if the content's equivalent, you're going to go back to the faster one eventually. So it's going to be stickiness, but it's also Google's going to start swapping those rankings on those two sites. So I'll get my head out of my presentation and look up. So any questions? And I put that mainly for my reminder. I do have a ton of flash, or a good amount of flash drives. So if you ask a question, I'll give you a flash drive. Or just come up to me and talk to me later. Yeah?
What performance difference do you see between TPL files and something like a display screen?
It depends. It depends on, there's a performance difference. Definitely is. And it's, the TPL files are slightly faster. and it is slightly faster. However, when you magnify that to larger scale sites that are dealing with a lot of traffic, that has a lot of effect actually going up. I also feel like, from my perspective, the TPL files give me a little more ability to manage code and manage those changes in version repository systems. However, depending on the site, so display suite, I'll go back to that actually. So that allows you to kind of customize what you're going to output, depending on the page you're on, or depending on maybe the view that you're on, right? Or even for mobile. So mobile tools integrates with it as well. However, TPL files, you can put in some code and say, on this page, show this field. On this page, show this field. The one way is all in code. So if you ever had to make a change, you have to make a code change. If you don't have a developer supporting you all the time, that's tough. So use display suite. But performance-wise, I would go TPL files, but they're all different types of evaluations. Yes.
How is the change to Twig and Drupal 8 going to impact all this?
So I have actually tried. I've implemented a site on Drupal 8, not a production site, obviously, but to get used to the idea of Symfony and Twig. I would say that it's actually going to. So when you talk about the TPL files, it compresses them and it almost compiles them. So there's a lot of performance improvements there that you wouldn't even have to deal with. The things that I've talked about here, I think what the immediate impact is that all these modules aren't going to support it right away. So it's going to take some time for the ability to just go out and download a module, and then it's going to work in Twig. However, Twig does have the ability to, because I've worked with Symfony and Twig outside of Drupal, and it has the ability to do the compression, do the aggregation for you, and it does kind of aggregate its template files. So there's a lot of ability there that may not even exist in Drupal today that we're going to be able to take advantage of. So, I guess I don't know, but I see some very good potential. Anything else? Okay.